Well, hi everyone, and this is Rusty again. And today's video is another one suggested by a hiker, by Mike. He suggested I do something about the what I'll paraphrase and say the unwritten rules of hiking, at least on the Appalachian Trail. Now, when he first suggested this, I thought, well, this is going to take me just a few seconds. I'll talk about not shaking hands, fist bumping to avoid passing diseases around. And the hiker going uphill has the right of way. You don't want to break their momentum, and done. Well, of course, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I just had just more and more and more to talk about. And really, the rules come in two basic categories. One, respect for others, and the other is respect for the environment. So I'm going to rush through some of these just because some of them are real simple so that I can concentrate on maybe the more complex ones. So what we'll be talking about today is first shelter etiquette, then the etiquette when you're meeting others, and then helping other hikers, respect for the environment, and trail magic. Okay, so first, shelter etiquette. Shelters, they're out there for all the hikers to use at need. And what will happen is, if you arrive late at a shelter, usually you don't just burst in. That's why I think I need to get a red filter on a red light because people are trying to sleep. Just common courtesy, if you are at a shelter late and there's room for you, then by all means, be extremely careful, extremely quiet. Same thing with leaving early, though, I try my best to be quiet if I'm leaving and there's other hikers still sleeping, but the fact is, we all have different schedules, and I think other hikers do have to recognize that if you want to hit the trail early, that's legitimate. What I'll typically do is, at least if it's not raining out, I'll try getting my equipment out and away from the shelter a little bit, maybe onto a picnic table or something like that, as I pack up. Also, if I'm in a shelter, I'll do a lot of my packing up the night before. Hiker midnight is basically when it gets dark. I was in a shelter with Craig. We were up in Maine. There were about 4 or 5 hikers there, and there were 3 younger through hikers who just stood kind of leaning at the front of the shelter, and they just talked and talked through the dark hours. Really kind of rude. They were young. I don't think they were intentionally being rude. That's actually fairly rare that you find somebody who's intentionally rude, but really have to respect that. Lights out, the lights are out, the sun has gone down. That means lights out on the trail. And really, you should keep that in mind. Music and other noise. I was at a campsite, and I think it was in Pennsylvania, and there was a shelter there, and there were a bunch of, buddies, 50-something guys. They had music blaring. They were not taking the shelter, but they were at the shelter site. So if you were in the shelter, you would have had, you would have heard them. And they had tents, and they had folding chairs and all that sort of stuff. And and they were not bad people. They really weren't. I mean, I went up there to hang something on a bear pole. They were very friendly. They were nice guys. I think they just were unaware of how important it is for the other hikers that they're able to get sleep. Now, I actually pitched a tent a little ways away from them, and they did quiet down a little after dark, but it was going for a while. So sometimes you run into people, and it was kind of hard. I didn't know how to address it with them. So I ended up not, because I wasn't actually staying in the shelter. But like I said, a lot of times it's just like people who violate the rules aren't necessarily doing it intentionally or not. It's just like, to them, this wasn't a big deal. So I don't know what to do about it other than to, maybe, call one of them aside and give them a polite word. Hey, these other guys are trying to sleep. Rainy days, there's always room at the shelter. You get as many people into the shelter as you can. I've show this picture of the Goddard shelter on the side of Glastonbury in Vermont, we had 14 people in there because it was raining so hard. People just needed to get out of the rain. So you always make room for a newcomer in a shelter if you can. Cooking in a shelter, it really depends on the shelter design. Some shelters are actually designed to have a little area out front where you can cook. But I see a lot of burn rings inside shelters, and we hear quite often about shelters burning down. You've got to be really careful, especially with fuel. I have solid fuel, which is actually safer as far as it's not going to spill and go all over the place and set a shelter on fire. But just a thing to be aware of. The picnic tables are there for a reason. A lot of times they will have a metal sheet somewhere on them, which is where you're supposed to put your stove. So let's avoid cooking inside the shelters, at least inside the ones that aren't designed for that, as much as possible. Now, I actually always bring with me a metal reflector shield for underneath my underneath my stove and another one around it, so I keep the fire contained. But I'm also, careful not to do the cooking in the shelter. Tent in a shelter, just inexcusable. I'm sorry. I mean, there was one time I think I saw somebody had a tent in a shelter, and she was the only one there. Okay, if it's a buggy night, I can see if you're certain nobody else is going to show up, I guess you can set up your freestanding tent in a shelter. But not knowing who's going to show up at the shelter, it's kind of a rude thing to do because it does take up a lot of space. A hammock in a shelter, maybe a little different. The last time I was in Maine, there was a guy in a hammock in the shelter, and it was pouring out, and we didn't begrudge him that because he had it strung in such a way that it wasn't taking floor space away from other hikers. Hiker priority, this is one of the few times when there is kind of a class system. There generally isn't. You don't want there to be one, at least. So when you're talking about through hikers and long section hikers really should have priority at these shelters. Shorter section hikers would be next in line, and the weekend warriors are, they're next. I mean, if you're going to go out for a short hike, you carry a tent with you. I think you should carry a tent with you anyway, a tent or a hammock. But some through hikers don't, or they've been on a very long day. They're dead tired because they've come thousands of miles. And just one of the unwritten rules is they really do. Well, actually, it's written in some places that the through hikers have priority in the shelters. So that's shelter etiquette. Meeting others. Well, these are some of the quick ones. Right away, the person headed uphill has the right of way. You don't want them to have to break their stride. If they stop and say, come on down, like sometimes if you're coming down a tough climb and you're just stuck in a spot, you got to use common sense. While generally the uphill hiker has the right of way, if you're in the middle of a rock face and they're at a landing spot, well, they'll usually, they should let you go. So, all these rules got to be taken with a grain of salt. Fist bumping, I'm not even talking about cooties in this case. The reason you fist bump if you make any physical contact, as opposed to shaking hands, it's just things like noroviruses and beaver fever, all these things. I mean, let's face it, you've been out there, you haven't been washing your hands diligently, I'm sure. It is out in nature. You do get pretty nasty. So we don't put somebody in the spot of having to refuse to shake your hand. You just offer your fist, and everybody understands why we're all doing it. Social distancing, that's a term that has come up, and this is when we're talking about the coronavirus. I just don't want to get into arguments with others. Hikers, they generally respect. If they see you're keeping your distance, they will understand that and keep away. Complaining about the weather, don't be a downer. Don't be a Debbie Downer out on the trail. It's tough enough for people who've been out there for a while. I know I was out there for 40 days on one hike, and day after day it does start to get you down on occasion, and somebody with a bad attitude just can kind of spoil it for you. But the condescending attitude, which you will occasionally get, there is an occasional jerk out there. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Look at this picture. If you were to guess which one of these two guys was more of a through hiker, you probably would guess the guy in the white. That's Craig, my son. Well, he was just a weekend warrior like myself at the time that this picture was taken. I'm sure that was Laura was with us and she took the picture. And on that trip, I distinctly remember we were coming up a hill and a guy was coming down, and Laura and I were a little bit ahead of Craig. I mean, not a lot. I mean, he was, 20 yards behind us or something. And this guy was clearly a through hiker, and we said hello to him, and it was like we didn't even exist. He looked down, he saw Craig coming up and thought, there's the guy I want to talk to. He's like, you people get out of my way. You're just weekend warriors. And he actually, thought Craig was a through hiker and started asking him about things. And like Craig was like, I don't know. I just hopped in the car with my father and we drove to the trailhead. So that condescending attitude, everybody is out there trying to enjoy nature. And if they are following the unwritten rules, having respect for other hikers and respect for the environment, there's no reason to throw a class system, with that exception of the priority at the shelters that I already mentioned. Let's not do that when you're out there. I encourage everybody when I see them, like, oh, great, you're doing 30 miles. That's fantastic. You're doing a 10-mile day hike. You're doing a 5-mile day hike. Well, it's great that you're out here in the, in the natural environment and enjoying yourself. And that is the attitude we have to have. Nobody is better than anybody else. I mean, I've told the stories on other videos about the guys I ran into up in Maine. They thought that if you weren't northbound through hiking, you weren't worth anything. Like, you shouldn't even be out. You had no right to be on the trail if you weren't a northbound through hiker. So a weekend hiker or maybe a 1-week section hiker, as far as he was concerned, had no right to be out there. And when I mentioned that, hey, maybe somebody couldn't schedule to go north to south, they had to start later in the year. Well, they should quit their job because this is the only right way to do it. People like that, they're the ones who shouldn't be out on the trail. So helping others, well, if you have extra stuff and you come across a hiker box. Now, a hiker box is something that is at a hostel normally. It's not like it's in the middle of the wood, there's a hiker box. Don't leave things at shelters, things that you don't want. That is actually the opposite of being respectful of the other hikers, because somebody else is going to, whether it's a ridge runner or one of the trail maintainers, they're just going to have to carry your stuff out. Now, if you've left it in a container and it's truly trail magic, that's fine, but don't just leave, oh, somebody might want to use this plastic water bottle. No, carry it out. Having electrolytes, a quick story. Craig was sick up in Maine, got a little overheated. Another hiker gave him some electrolytes to help, replenish him. And interestingly, I returned to that exact same shelter a few months later, and there was a through hiker there who had overheated. So it doesn't just happen to people who go out for for a week here or there. I mean, a through hiker, he had a bad day. He was getting a migraine. I was able to pay it forward, and I gave him the bottle of electrolytes. Supplies, especially fuel. If you have extra, usually I bring a little bit more than I'll end up needing, and the Esbit solid fuel tablets I carry are very tough to come by. I was up in Maine again, and there was a hiker there who needed 2 more tablets to get him through to his next stop, and I was more than happy to give it to him. It was my last night on the trail, so I knew exactly how many that I had. If somebody's water filter or water purification supply has died out, hey, technically a water filter is a consumable, because it's only good for 10,000 gallons, but, help somebody out, filter some water for them. And then finally, whenever you have information that they ask for, and there's going to be one exception to that I'm going to be coming to, be free with the information, help people out by giving the information if they want it. Okay, so respect for the environment. Littering and despoiling nature, that's just like this picture I found in Maryland. I took a picture of it. Somebody drew, I guess that's a rocket ship or something, about to take off on a tree. It just, not necessary. No carving in trees, no putting your initials in, no painting rocket ships on the sides of trees. Campfires and fire rings. If you're going to build a campfire, I'm not a big campfire builder, but occasionally I have. Well, this gentleman here, I think he was out with his grandson. He seemed to be old school, and I was a little annoyed at first. I wasn't sure he was with the program there. He had to build the fire. Well, it turned out he did cook over it. And when he discovered somebody had thrown a plate of spaghetti in the stream, he went down there and he did everything he could to get that stuff out. And so he was, I misjudged. Sometimes you can do that. And of course, whoever the jerk was who threw a bowl of spaghetti in the stream, the water supplies are very important to the hikers. And doing something like that is just like inexcusable. I hope, I wish blisters on whoever did it or something like that. Stealth sites. If you're going to do stealth camping, if you at all can, at the very least, use an established stealth site. That's typically what I look for. I think only once or twice that I have to pitch a tent in what was a less established stealth site. We want to minimize impact to the environment. There is the carry in, carry out, leave no trace principles that I won't go over here. That could be in and of itself a whole full video, and there are plenty of them out on the internet. Take a look at one of those. Walking off the trail, especially when you get above tree line in those alpine sections. Here's a picture here of a very delicate ecosystem, and you're really encouraged, well actually you're pretty much forbidden to go walking over some of this delicate plant life. Stay on the hard surfaces, stay on the trail. You have boots for a reason. If there's something just a little too deep, like a big mud puddle that you don't trust the depth, test it with your hiking pole. And if you can get through it without stepping off trails, please do that. And then finally, something that bears do in the woods, and you know what I'm talking about. You can't always get to a privy, and I understand that, when you're out in nature and sometimes nature calls. But when you do, cat hole, take the toilet, have a special baggie, well marked so it doesn't get mixed up with anything else, but a special Ziploc bag that you can put the paper in. And I'm not saying carry it all the way. When you get to the next campsite that does have a privy, well, you can throw the toilet paper in the privy. And speaking of that, only toilet paper in the privy. I have seen the guys who have to actually, the new moldering privies, one side is composting while the other side is getting new material for composting. And then when the guy has to pull the composted out, he's got to dig through this material and get all the candy wrappers and crap like that shouldn't be in there. So please carry in, carry out. Toilet paper's okay. Don't leave it in the woods. If you can't get to the next shelter where there's a privy, well, then fine, bring it with you. It's not that big of a deal, and you'll have the opportunity to throw it out because the toilet paper is, I guess, compostable or whatever, and it's acceptable to put in the privies. Okay, trail magic. First, don't overdo it. Remember there's probably a lot of other hikers out there. Don't take more than you need. And if you need a whole lot, well, just, temper it a little bit. But don't underdo it either. This gentleman here, if you have an Instagram account, look him up, Snoopy on the Trail. He was at the Pinmar State Park when I came by, and he didn't see me because he couldn't park close to the trail. He had to park out in a parking lot that was nearby. And I had already eaten, and he kept on saying, "Hey, you want something? You need something?" And it's like, I was almost insulting him by saying, no, thanks, I'm fine. But I finally realized that, people who do trail angel stuff, they want to see you, take advantage of it. That's why they're there. They're not going to, think lower of you because you accepted a handout. I mean, that's why they're there. And I realized, hey, I was not treating this guy right. And he's actually a very famous, apparently, in trail culture, a famous trail angel. He was actually helping his wife. He was following his wife. She was through hiking the trail. I guess he had hiked before, and he was actually kind of being her support team. And I went over and he gave me a bunch of Propel mixes and some other things, and it was very. I'm glad I did it because it showed respect for him and respect for what he was trying to do. This next gentleman, this was up in Maine. Just an example of, you don't just grab stuff and run. Let's be courteous and let's stop and talk. And I stopped and talked, exchanged stuff with him for a while. The prior hiker who was just leaving as I got there actually turned out, this guy was from Montana. They turned out to be from the same hometown, knew the same people, though they had never met. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I stopped and talked to him, and really that is about how you show your appreciation. You could offer payment. I have yet to run into or see a trail angel who would accept that, including, and I'll get to that in a few minutes, when Mike and I set up a trail magic tent in Great Barrington. Another rule: don't ruin the joy. If you say, "Hey, there's trail magic coming up," and that kind of ruins the fun of finding it. Also, if it turns out that it was taken away, it was finished up, somebody may be looking forward to it and finding out that it's not there anymore. There is an exception. All these rules, you got to use common sense. I had a real long hiking day. The longest I've ever hiked in a single day was like 24 miles, and I was at mile 23 and a half coming to a campground, a camping area, I should call it. And there just wasn't a flat spot in there that didn't already have a tent on it. And some guy said, "Hey, if you don't mind going another half a mile, there's some trail magic at the trailhead there." And that clinched it for me. I mean, I think in that, and then he told me, then there was a lodge that I could also go to. So that clinched it for me, So in that case, I think he had to judge, yeah, it's getting dark. This guy just said he's come 24 miles. Yeah, he to let me know that it was okay to go on, telling me that there was some trail magic up ahead, actually did make sense. And then finally, there's do it yourself. Like I said, Mike called me up one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to set up a trail magic tent in Great Barrington. You want to join me?" I went out, I got a bunch of supplies, and sometimes when you're not out hiking, you can still share the joy by being kind of on the other side and doing some of that sort of thing. So those are the unwritten rules. I'm sure there's a lot of others that people have, and maybe some people disagree. If you disagree or you think I missed one, an important one, well, put it in the comments. Thanks.